This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Welcome to PharmacyToDose, the critical care podcast. Ooh, boy, did that feel good. Let's do that one more time. Welcome to PharmacyToDose, the critical care podcast. And I'm your host, Nick Peters. And wherever you are and however you are listening, thank you. QXMD builds mobile solutions that drive evidence-based care in clinical practice. So check out Read for easy access to research personalized for you. Calculate for over 500 easy-to-use decision support tools, and Learn to earn CME online in minutes per day. Try them today at qxmd.com/apps. Again, that is qxmd.com/apps. It's so great to be back. I have absolutely missed everybody. I've received some messages kind of asking where I've been, what's been going on. First off, we'll go ahead and quell any rumors. It was just a quick break. Don't worry, the pod isn't going anywhere anytime soon. There's a few reasons. I would say the primary one is that, frankly, I was just a little exhausted. I hope everyone understands that's listening that I don't get paid for this, and I work on the pod during my free time, and I love it. Not to say that I don't, but with everything going on, it just kind of caught up to me a little bit. My wife and I just bought our first house, so it feels like the last 6 weeks have been either packing or unpacking. And then I think the last kind of big reason is that, all of us are stretched pretty thin right now. And every guest that joins me is doing this out of the kindness of their heart. Now, yes, they all get a friend of the pod kind of gift package per se, but it's not filled with cold hard cash. We'll say that. So when everyone has a jam-packed schedule and we're all stretched pretty thin, it's hard to have the great programming that we've really been lucky to have so far. So took a little break, but now I'm back, and oh baby, am I joined by a great friend, a fluid steward, and the official PharmacyToDose conference correspondent, Anthony Hawkins. And today we are recapping the 2020 ACCP, or the American College of Clinical Pharmacy annual meeting. I think for some of the listeners who were with us and have been with us from some of the beginning, you might remember that we recorded our last kind of recap, our SCCM recap, on site in our hotel room. Unfortunately, that's not the case here because, like everything in our life, the meeting went virtual. Now, for those who don't know Anthony Hawkins, he's a critical care faculty member at UGA and a member of the UGA Critical Care Collaborative, or the UGA C3. Now, Anthony, happy Election Day, brother. How are you?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Sun is out. I can't believe it's November. When did that happen?
Man, I don't know, but November is my favorite time of year because it is the peak of deer season. You caught me right at the beginning of my vacation to take a week to go chase some whitetails, and the weather has just really flipped here in Georgia. We had our first cold front because it's been at least in South Georgia, it's been still in the high 70s, maybe even mid 80s some days. So we just hit in the low 40s, high 30s yesterday for the first time.
So is that peak weather? Is that exactly what you want when you're going hunting?
It was very depressing because yesterday was the first really big cold front that came to Georgia. Like I said, we hit the 30s, and I spent my morning in pharmacotherapy teaching the P3s about sepsis and septic shock and all about fluids and pressors with Trisha Brannon. But it's going to start this afternoon.
Now that says a lot because when you're talking about fluids, there are very few other places you want to be. I'm guessing about the only one is turkey or deer hunting.
Man, in the woods, definitely trumps talking about fluids for me.
Now, we had talked about doing, we were both going to ACCP, and we'll get to, we were both involved with the meeting. But this was supposed to be in Dallas, Texas. And I know the SCCM Congress that was in Orlando, and we kind of talked the beginning of, airing our grievances per se for any Seinfeld fans out there about Florida and things. But were you bummed? Were you looking forward to going to Texas at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Texas many times. I've honestly never been to Dallas. Figured there'd be a lot of crap talked about the Cowboys, especially with Dak Prescott rolling his ankle like he did. Praying for him, but that was a rough shout. But definitely being in Dallas, being in a hotel room to record the pod together, having a brewski in the afternoon to record this thing, as opposed to, you're just getting off work and I'm sitting here with a cup of coffee, getting my day started. So definitely a change of events.
Yeah, I'm not wearing a Hawaiian shirt right now, unfortunately. No. Yeah, I was really hoping, because I've been to a few cities in Texas, but I haven't been to Dallas. And I'll be honest, I was kind of hoping to get like a pair of cowboy boots or a cowboy hat or something. And I feel like you got to do that like when you're in Texas or something like that.
I do feel like the cowboy hat is the thing. I do believe Brian Gilbert, I don't remember when it was, but he put the cowboy hat on the pigeon or something, was chasing it around town.
I believe every bit of that story. Shout out to Brian there. And I think, it's always fun just visiting a new city and getting to kind of explore. I bet they got good bowling alleys there.
I mean, I don't want to talk about bowling too much because we just started this tradition when we were, it was last year.
It was
in Orlando, and I bowled my best game ever. With you there to witness it. And I was really excited to carry that tradition forward.
Yeah, that's how we celebrated recording the pod last time. Is I think we went to like a business meeting or something like that, kind of a networking thing. And then we did a little bowling. That's exactly right. But let's kind of shift gears here a little bit and kind of talk about the meeting itself. So now you've had some more experience with some of these virtual meetings and doing some of these kind of like talks where you're not in person. So what were your kind of thoughts about, because ACCP is like a much bigger one, I'm guessing, than some of the other ones. What were some of your kind of general thoughts in terms of like overall how they pulled it off in terms of virtual versus in person?
I think they made the decision to go virtual pretty early on. Which definitely helped things, especially as a speaker. A lot of these organizations, they have these presentation templates, and over the past 3 or 4 months doing talks for different organizations, man, they would just blow up my email. Oh, we've changed it from one city to the next, and we've moved it back for a couple weeks. Oh, we moved it back another 2 or 3 weeks. For unexpected reasons. Oh, now we're going to make it virtual. And every time they made a change, they changed the template. And I'm already not a fan of templates for various reasons, but, locking me in that box. But changing templates every 2 to 3 weeks, every time they made a change of decision, was really painful. So I'm glad they took a quick decision and good leadership by Brian Erstad, et cetera, to keep things moving forward in a executive way.
Yeah, that's kind of a hassle when you're changing, because the formatting's all different. It's not like it's just a simple copy and go, because you got to look at every slide. And you're a for those who may not have like seen or had the pleasure to hear Anthony like speak at one of these conferences, you are a big fan of the kind of non-traditional presentation. And so when you're flipping from all these different templates, I'm sure that was just kind of a pain at times.
Oh yeah, then you got to worry about what platforms use and if they can deal with animations and how I'm going to be able to click to advance my slides. And what we can talk more about that a little bit later, but definitely just different things to get used to.
Something that you mentioned, I thought it was very organized, kind of building on the fact that they made the decision to go virtual earlier and quicker than a lot of other kind of meetings. I think it led to really good organization. And I think that was kind of from, not only their working with speakers, I was a moderator. I felt like the message was very consistent, and we at least had some idea of what was happening versus kind of being in the dark with a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I liked the kind of mixture of, there was live programming, there was some pre-recordings with live Q&As. There were some that were just recorded ahead of time, and then they were just available on demand. So they kind of have a little different, variety in some of the talks to kind of allow people to figure out what they liked and maybe what they didn't like. Maybe it was more of like an experiment to figure out what worked best for them, but ultimately I think it worked really well, actually.
Yeah, I'm really curious how the conference registration was compared to previous years. And, like you mentioned, a lot of the programming is, even if it was live, they still recorded it so you can go back and watch later, which I thought was really great. So I wonder how much that impacted maybe how many folks actually did log in for the live version versus, especially because they had a variety of different times they were available, some at lunch hour, especially depending on what coast you're on. And some were right when people were getting off work and probably trying to commute home, et cetera. So wondering how many people pushed it off and just could go back and, watch it later.
Yeah, this is, I feel like it's a little nitpicking, but, the PRN sessions and things, those were, some of these things were 90 minutes, some 2 hours long. Man, at times it felt like it was really hard to sit and just stare at my computer and kind of listen to. It felt like you're just doing CE, basically, because it's just a whole different environment, right? I'm not in a conference room with people that I haven't seen, because I feel like when you're in that environment, you're just more likely to pay attention more. I'll tell you what, hand up, I'm listening to some of these talks and I'd find myself 15, 20 minutes in, I'll check an email or something like that. It's just hard to keep focused for that long sometimes.
Yeah. And in the era of live TV, that's the great thing about it being virtual. It's, unless you're trying to watch it in real time, the live sessions, it's great that you could just hit pause and you could go get a snack or whatever it was. Full disclosure, I put my laptop up on the bar in the kitchen and I watched some CE while I sharpened broadheads and cleaned some arrows to prepare for what's to come.
Now, I think that, one thing that I might have liked is, a lot of them, right, almost every big session that I went to had 2 or 3 speakers, and it kind of would have been nice. Like they have it to where it's like this video and you can play it. Now, the one thing that I thought was really nice about that is there's plenty of times when I've been at a conference and I'm sitting there and you're trying to scribble notes and then you're like, oh shoot, what did that guy say? Or, oh man, I missed what she said. And it's clearly like the one phrase that wraps up the whole slide. And then they're just on to the next one. So that was a very nice thing I thought about this, was that you can pause, go back. It was easier to take screenshots. You're not it's not the iPhone picture of the slide where you have someone else's phone who's also trying to hold it up in the slide, trying to take it as well.
Absolutely what I thought of. It's so much easier to go back to the slide and take a picture from your phone to remember, as opposed to, oh man, I just missed it. Because you always have to wait until some of the folks, the speakers, they'll have animations for their bullets, and you take a picture because it's a great slide and then realize they have another bullet to come up. So then you end up taking 5 pictures of the same slide. And then by the time they get to the last animation that pops up and you go to take a picture, they're already on to the next slide and you actually missed the full thing.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the speaker's trying to talk about, this didn't happen, but let's just say, for example, the history of sepsis in 20 minutes. So they don't really have time to allow, photos on every slide, right? They're trying to cruise through and try to hit some things. So I did like that. But I wish there would have been kind of a way to, so it wasn't a YouTube video, but that's what it felt like the embedded video on the website. And you almost went, you could move the video to whatever time you wanted. And it felt like it would have been nice to have little page markings or indents, or a way to if you wanted to hear one specific part of a session, you could either go to a specific time or click on that person and it would take you there and you could listen to that 30-minute kind of talk. I feel like that's kind of a first world complaint there, but that's something hopefully that we can get going for future things.
Yeah, that definitely would have been a nice aspect. I will say I did like that ACCP, they emailed us, registrants every morning or every afternoon, today is day 4 of the meeting, and these are the things that are specifically happening today. And then everything inside that email had embedded hyperlinks, so it would take you straight to the quote meeting room or whatever it was where that talk was occurring. So I thought that was great. And I also like if you went to the meeting website, you could go to the full schedule, and then they had a couple different ways you could filter things on the side, either the type of programming, whether it was live or pre-recorded or on demand. You could sort if it was PRN related, and those types of things. So I thought it was really well organized. You could get to where you wanted to be pretty quickly, but not within the talk like you mentioned, which I also think would be a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, this is the actual one meeting, because I think it's hilarious when these meetings, they try to create this content that's like, hey, you can get 380 hours of CE, but it turns out they're all conflicted, and realistically you can get much less. But like when they say in this that you can get like 100 hours of CE with no overlap or conflict, like this might actually be the first conference in history that's 100% true.
Yeah. And that's also like in other live meetings, like you said, a lot of the programming overlaps. SCCM is the worst, because I'm like, man, all of this stuff is so good, and there's 5 different talks I want to go to, but obviously you can only be in one place at one time. So sometimes it's nice you and I can split up and share details afterwards, but we also like to hang out together. And then I feel like after the meeting, it takes another, 3 or 4 weeks before the programming is then available online, so you can go back and watch it. And maybe just because of the sheer number of things they're trying to do, but I feel like all the ones that were live, they still had on demand for you to view at your own pleasure very quickly. So whatever tactics they use this time to get that stuff out very quickly, I thought hopefully that will carry forward too.
Yeah, and initially, so the ACCP meeting, the annual meeting, is normally over like a 4 or 5 day period, right? It's kind of starts on a weekend and it ends on like a Wednesday or something like that. So when they announced that the virtual meeting was going to take place over 2 weeks, initially I kind of thought that was a con. I was like, man, it feels like this is just hanging over you for a while. But with this virtual meeting, I kind of thought it was actually an advantage. I thought it kind of gave you some flexibility as to when you had to listen. Now we'll kind of talk about flexibility, maybe a loose term there, because there were some. I think the virtual meeting comes with its own potential problems when you're trying to fit this into everyday life. But overall, I thought that rather than trying to squeeze this into 3 days, breaking it out over a period of time kind of made it. I think it made it more likely that people might at least participate in a couple sessions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even like you mentioned, an hour and a half talk, and 20 minutes in, you're like twiddling your thumbs and thinking about other things that you can do. So especially if they crammed in all of these presentations in 3 days, your mind would have been shot. And I think also, and I don't know, what all the listeners have experienced, but if you register for these conferences that are virtual, like, do you take 3 days of professional time off of work to sit at home and get your CE? If it's all condensed like that, or do you continue working and then just catch up on the CE in the evening times? I think like some of the viewers, I think Mojda had a picture on her Twitter where she's like, oh, kids are in bed or they're off doing their thing, and now I get to come listen to some CE and have a glass of wine and unwind after work. So I think it gives you a lot of the flexibility that way, and without cramming it all into one.
I mean, I guess that's probably the first meeting or session that I've listened to that an alcoholic beverage was involved. I mean, that is, if we're talking about pros, I think we have to put that in there.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I've seen folks at a live conference with a water bottle that didn't have water in it. just saying.
We'll leave names out there. So I would be very curious. So one thing that stood out to me was the schedule listed times on the agenda in Central Standard Time. So literally, I just thought about this. Is that the time zone that Dallas, Texas is in? Is that why they listed everything in Central Time?
Oh, that could be. I'm not sure.
Because I felt like I definitely was an hour late to something, because I just it felt like I was in a time machine, and I wrote down what the time was supposed to be in Central Time, not Eastern Time, and like all these things. But like, can we have like, what should be the universal time zone that should be used? Because me being biased, shouldn't it be Eastern Standard Time?
I feel like Eastern Standard Time is God's country, so I would say yes.
Now, for any of our Central Standard Time kind of listeners, I do think that's the best time zone. You get the NFL starting at noon. Like, I feel like from a perspective of entertainment and sports and things like that, it's much easier to watch the end of all those things. So I do like Central Time, but I just felt like here it's like, come on, let's get us some Eastern or maybe even Pacific, where it's different enough that I think you would recognize a little easier.
Yeah, and pro tip for all the students, residents, maybe even new practitioners, as you guys start to collaborate and a lot of your friends and folks that you've networked with start moving on and moving into different time zones and you're collaborating on things, you should make it a standard process when you put stuff on your calendar. Always, no matter who it is, always just be in the mindset to always include time zones when you add things to your calendar for that exact reason. I can't tell you how many times I have messed that up because I am so terrible at details like that.
I can confirm it's happened at least once. Now, we were talking about, and I'm the same way, for the record, I sign off on what Anthony's saying there. And when I email people to come on, I'll even put Eastern Standard Time, even if I know, like, I'm emailing if it's someone from like Philadelphia or something. But you were talking about kind of, we're watching this lecture as kids are going to bed, or maybe we're getting up and hopping on the bike and listening, to controversies and stress ulcer prophylaxis. But I felt like that was probably one of the two biggest differences that stood out was that I'm guessing almost everyone was still working during this conference. Like, I don't know anybody that took time off, especially 2 weeks or even a few days. Like, do you know anyone that like took time off to really like participate in the meeting?
Yeah, I don't know of any. I just did a talk like I said, it's virtual, and that's why I think it was nice that some of it was live and some was pre-recorded, because I presented on fluid stewardship a couple weeks ago to Oklahoma Society of Health Systems Pharmacists for the state, and they condensed all of their stuff into 1 or 2 days, and there was no overlapping sessions, and it's obviously a smaller meeting than ACCP. But I mean, people take off work to do that because it's very condensed. It's only 2 days, whereas this is 4, 5, 6 days if it was in real time. So I'm not too sure that many people took off work for it.
Yeah, so it just felt like, because normally when you're going to a conference, like it feels like a little bit of a break, right? You're not in the hospital or wherever your practice site is, right? You're at this place where your kind of whole goal is either presenting research or presenting, speaking on a specific topic, or really just learning, right? Bringing things back to your institution where you can kind of do that a little more leisurely, right? And you're catching up with people. And I felt like here, right, most of us are still working that, 7 to 4, 8 to 5, what have you. And then we're trying to squeeze that in places. And, a lot of us are in the ICU and the ED. We don't have 90 minutes or 2 hours to carve out, right? Like, between meetings and just patient care responsibilities, to do that actually on work time is, I'd argue, close to impossible for a lot of us.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that you definitely miss out on the live meeting is all of the networking and, just the FaceTime and the interaction and seeing people that you haven't seen in a while, making new connections and collaborations, et cetera. That was one thing that the platform that ACCP used, I think, was very siloed. Like, you would jump into a meeting and you would listen and learn, and then you would log off and go do your thing. I don't know if it was Georgia Pharmacists Association or Alabama Society of Pharmacy that I did a talk for this summer, but whatever platform they used, one of them, you could go into the quote the virtual lobby. And so anybody that was registered for the meeting that wasn't currently in a session, they could do other things on their computer, do emails or whatever, but they could still be logged into the meeting and stay in the lobby. And then you could, if I was in the lobby also, I could see who was in the lobby and then start talking to them. Now, that's a little bit creepy, kind of sliding into somebody's DMs without a little bit of a forward notice. But, sometimes that bears some good fruit.
Man, you hit the nail on the head. I mentioned the two things that felt like they were different, and the networking is by far and away number one. And you and I have talked about this, not on the pod itself, but ACCP is one of my favorite meetings for networking because it just feels like the pharmacists who are involved and active in ACCP are all a really tight-knit group. Now, that's not to say, when I say tight-knit, that doesn't mean it's no new friends kind of thing, but it's just more, right? Always more the merrier. Everyone, we're always looking for more people to get involved in things like that. But it's just, man, it's so nice. And it feels like you're able to catch up with the most amount of pharmacists specifically. And it was a bummer because I felt like I got almost none of that.
Yeah, and it's some of the things like even outside of critical care, and we'll talk about the poster sessions shortly, but I remember last year in New York, I was roaming around ACCP and saw a buddy of mine, Nick Schweier out of Oklahoma, and he had a poster in the same. I think I had a poster at the same session, and he was looking at fluids and sodium load with IV metronidazole with LVAD, like driveline infections.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, man, that's really up my alley with fluids and stewardship and consequences of different fluid diluents, et cetera. And then I could go see him at the cardiology PRN or, at the hotel lobby or something. And then we can immediately pick up on talking about his research from his poster that I saw. And then, that turns into, some collaboration of some kind.
Yeah, you definitely missed that. And it also felt like, because it was virtual, and maybe this was just me, maybe I'm the person that just didn't reach out to others and like connect with them. But I feel like when you're at the annual meeting or when I'm heading there, I'm reaching out to a lot of people like, hey, for example, if this is in person, like, hey, you going to Dallas? Hey, you going to Dallas? Right. We definitely would have had a friend of the pod meetup of people to get to say hey to some people in person and all those things. And I just felt like it was one of these that like I just plugged and chugged on my calendar and kind of went. Now the real question is this is kind of a running joke for any critical care PRN members is, classically they use some of the money for this open bar at the annual meeting. So I have to ask if we had no in-person meeting, I'm wondering what's happening with the open bar money. Like, are we all getting shipped a bottle of like $3 Chuck?
No, but I do think you got some money for a professional development thing through the critical care PRN. So maybe that's it. Maybe they have another award that they could give to students, residents, or professional development stuff like that, or they're pocketing it so that whenever it's in Puerto Rico, and that's SCCM. I'm sorry, but you go to San Francisco and everybody talks about the bowl of chips is $800. So maybe we'll just pocket it so we can get twice as much, or we can just prepare for the expensive cities.
So basically what I'm hearing is, hey, the next time we have an in-person meeting, everyone's going to want to go to the critical care PRN kind of business meeting.
That's right.
Yeah, you mentioned... No, go ahead.
I was going to say the last meeting we are at SCCM, we did have a PharmacyToDose happy hour where we had a bunch of folks come. I guess since ACCP is virtual, not to put you on the spot, but maybe we could create a virtual happy hour for listeners to just pop into some Zoom link. I will say the capacity is normally like 300, so we'll have to keep limits to that. But I think that would be a win.
I think you are giving me way too much credit if you think 300 people are going to be taking time to come to a Zoom cocktail hour. But yeah, that was the bummer, man. And of course, this is just life right now, right? That we're all dealing with this, but that was, that was probably the biggest thing that was missing. That really felt like it was a huge void in this. And I think it's something like, and you're right. It sounds like there are some other organizations that may have smaller conferences that are doing kind of in-person things like, I don't know, Google Hangouts or like the Zoom or something like that. And it felt like that would be something to do that could help with this. Now, one thing I will say is that you and I both, we had prior obligations, so we were unable to go to the business meeting. So I'm guessing that there was some minor interaction there, but a little different than if all of us are in one big like conference center or like a banquet hall, and kind of in person. So I'm guessing there were some things there that happened.
Yeah, and I think during a live meeting, you may see some of your critical care folks that you want to see during the day, but different people, they have meetings of different kinds. Mm-hmm. They may stay in their hotel room and actually catch up on some other work while they're there, or they're going to be in other CE presentations. But the PRN business meetings are always in the evening, so they kind of separate themselves from any other education. So you see a whole, like, such a great turnout there. And then you have, some food, some pretty heavy hors d'oeuvres at the beginning. So there's some really good connections and conversations to be had at the beginning and the end. And then, the student and resident posters and people that get some travel awards, mm-hmm. They have their posters up so you can kind of go give some encouragement to some of the up and comers. And so I think all of those are good things that may or may not have happened because, like you said, I wasn't there either. I was actually doing practice interviews for P3 students virtually.
Virtual practice interviews for for future virtual meetings. That's a tongue tie. I couldn't even say it. Now you did say you did kind of allude to the fact that the PRN was unbelievably gracious to kind of award me a member development scholarship, and so I guess we'll kind of let the listeners in on the idea and where those funds are going to go. And it's going to be nothing, it's going to be related to the podcast, but nothing that's necessarily recorded. So one of the big things that is nice in medicine and critical care, because there's so much to remember, so much. And I tell this to students and learners too, like there's only so much room you can keep up in your noggin. We have computers in our pockets, we have, peripheral brains and things. But with the podcast itself, I really focus on trying to give practical information for clinicians, no matter what hospital you work at and things. But when you're put on the spot on rounds or you get that random phone call, it's hard to just pull up a podcast, right? Or the show notes, that can be hard. So we're in the very, very early stages of working on kind of creating a critical care pocket guide. And part of what this is going to be able to do is, we're going to really, this grant is going to focus on being sure that everyone that participates will get some sort of compensation for their time. Because I think a lot of us do way too much out of the goodness of our hearts without thinking of, without thinking of money. And that's because everyone is so amazing in this pharmacy family. But that's one of the things that I really want to do. And the second thing is try to make it affordable to everyone else. I think that a lot of the people who look to some of these pocket guides are students, residents, or people fresh out of residency and kind of new practitioners. And man, everything's more expensive now. Like you look at these books and they're $100, $200, $300. And so one thing that we're really hoping to do is try to keep these costs down, keep things practical, include references. So much, much more to come. This isn't anything that's going to come in the next month or two. It's more like a 12 to 15 month project, but that is on the horizon. That's where that scholarship money is going to be going. I'm really excited about it. We're not going to reveal any of some of the behind the scenes people just yet, but it's exactly the incredible critical care kind of pharmacists and just incredible people that you've been accustomed to hearing on the pod. So more to come on that, but yeah, very excited, and it's a lot of good things going to happen with that.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be super valuable just because there's so many residents and practitioners maybe that didn't do a residency or maybe did a PGY1 and they work in a hospital setting, and maybe they will cover some ICUs every once in a while, mm-hmm. or maybe they work in the main pharmacy or they work evening shift and they get a lot of the questions that come from the ICU during hours when they don't have clinical coverage.
Oh yeah.
In person, they're like, man, I just really wish I had some really quick resource to really help me out. And so I think you'll have, I think that's going to be a great resource for a lot of people, especially those that are not critical care folks.
Oh yeah. Yep. I appreciate the support, brother, but you're absolutely right. So that's more to come on that, but very, very exciting. So let's kind of dive in a little bit to like the actual meeting itself. And before we get to kind of the specific sessions, which is one of our favorite things to do, kind of talk about what we learned, highlight some of these awesome pharmacists who are doing great things in the meeting, the virtual poster sessions. Now, Anthony, did you participate in any, like, did you like submit a poster or like review or do any of like the rounds or anything like that with these?
And it wasn't involved this year with any of the poster sessions. No.
Now, one thing, so I did some of the virtual poster like rounds, and for those who may be unfamiliar with what that means, a lot of times at these meetings, right, everybody will put their research on a poster, and there's this big poster hall, and then a lot of the different specialties will have their like groups of pharmacists kind of go around and make sure that, you know, there's a group of people listening to, you know, what people's research was, asking insightful questions, giving feedback, but making sure that at some point they received and interacted with their peers in whatever specialty that might be. So I was very curious how this was going to go because just posters being virtual is just a very, very different thing. And you alluded to it earlier, like that is one of the best parts of the conferences is when they have the poster halls and you can kind of just wander. You can kind of just look at the posters, and you're exactly right. Like if you would have looked at a list or like an author list or things like that, compared to just walking the halls, you probably would have never found that poster last year, right? Where you knew somebody and then it turned out to be something that is directly related to research that you wanted or are already doing.
I love ACCP's poster sessions in person for that exact reason. You know, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but you know, you go to other conferences and the poster sessions are just so large because it's a quote requirement for all students to do a poster at various meetings, you know, to get a residency is kind of what their hype is. And there's so many posters and so many people are presenting at the same time. You get very little foot traffic. I've also done a virtual poster in the past with ACCP, I think at their spring meeting. And it was very similar. There's, you know, so many posters and you got like a 1 or 2 hour block time for people to come in and chat with you. And it's, you know, you typically have maybe 4 or 5 people come. But man, the ACCP live poster sessions are just flooded with people. So I'm definitely interested to hear how much quote foot traffic, you know, there was during the poster sessions that you were participating in.
Yeah. So the way it kind of works is that you like, there's like a post, like a link to the different posters. So you'll like click on it and it takes you to their individual like poster page. And now one thing that I loved was that you get to download that digital poster. And that is because there's so many times that like I'll get a handout of a poster that I'm interested in and it just inherently disappears. I'm guessing somewhere like in a bag that I have, there's like 100 research posters that are like printed out because it's like you'll collect all these things from the conference. It feels like it disappears. And so it's nice that like, that was one really good thing is that you can zoom in and look what's on the actual poster. But I feel like when you have, so you're able to zoom in on this poster and then it's a Q&A chat where basically like the presenter is like live, quote unquote, on their computer and it's like available for almost like a chat. So you leave like a message, like you're on a message board, right? Back in the day, and they respond to you. Now there's a couple things with that. One of the good things I liked was that I would leave a comment and then you would get an email when someone responded to you, which I thought was great because inherently I would have either A, forgotten, or B, I wouldn't have figured out how to get back to that poster that I was looking at. So I really liked that feature. It helped me. But then it's like I had a hard time knowing what to do with how to respond to some of those. Because right in person, you're asking a question, you'll nod your head or just say, "Oh, okay." But here it's like when it's online, I didn't really know what to say. I guess maybe I'm that awkward person, and I could have just said okay or thank you, but I'm not sure I responded to most of them. So if you're listening and I asked you a question, it was just because I didn't know how to respond to that. But that was the other thing with that, is that you don't get to hear the actual investigator talking about their research. There's only so much you can put on a poster. We know that. We're trying to make posters less crowded, not more. So when you don't have someone to kind of give you that 3 to 5 minute kind of spiel on their research, why they did what they did, maybe they inherently knew there were flaws and they were going to talk about what they did to try to overcome those, or what they were going to do in the future. All those things couldn't be on there. So I felt like that was probably the biggest flaw in them. Now, some of the presenters did have Zoom links where you could basically go to their room, and it was like a one-on-one Zoom where you could they could give you their spiel. Hand up, I did not do that. So there was a way for it to be a little more interactive, I guess, but I didn't necessarily go that route. But I think from a student or resident perspective, I bet they loved it. Do you remember how intimidated you probably weren't intimidated. I'm guessing you loved talking to everybody when you were a student or resident about your research or your posters, but I was always intimidated by it. So I was very happy. I would have been very happy as a resident being virtual and being able to, someone leaves you a question, you could quickly, look it up potentially, or, think of a really well thought out question, which inherently in the moment is sometimes very hard to do.
Naturally, as an extrovert, I always want to interact with people. I always want to see them face to face. So anytime I get a chance, and hopefully, and this goes for everybody, whatever you're doing your research on, hopefully you're passionate about it. So I'm always super excited to be able to talk in person, whether it's a presentation, a poster, etc. The thing that still, and to this day, always makes me the most nervous is not presenting my stuff, but the questions that may come from whoever's there listening.
Always. I mean, because you could be presenting on anticoagulation and Bill Dager, who you probably cited 8 times in your references, comes up and hears your talk, or he wants to hear your research, or you get the question out of the left field that you just have no clue what they're getting at, but you're on the spot in front of 5 different people and you got to come up with an answer.
And if you're a resident or a student and you don't know who some of these people are, their big names, you have no idea that they're standing in front of you. My PGY1 project was on ICU delirium, antipsychotics, and wouldn't you know it, I had John Devlin standing there as the moderator for the critical care professor walk around. And thank the good Lord he didn't rake me over the coals, because I clearly didn't know near as much as what I was talking about. But I didn't even know that was him until after the session, and my RPD was in the walk rounds too. And then she came back afterwards and told me about it. And I was like, oh, wow. Whew. Yeah, saving grace right there.
And the thing about it is the more kind of pharmacy legend status you have, the more dressed down you can be at conferences. So it even is going to, if you don't know who they are, sometimes their attire gives you even less clue in terms of how important they are. And that's when you know you've made it, when you can stroll around in jeans or like a quarter zip or something like that, and no one thinks twice. That's when you know you've made it, when dressing down is dressing up.
I was going to talk about this later, but now's the perfect time. I think you and I were at an SCCM meeting. I think it might have been in Hawaii. And one of the speakers gave a talk in a short sleeve Hawaiian shirt and some, the most basic white New Balance shoes. And I was like, man, when you can give an international national talk like that, that you've made it. And so I thought, that was going to be hopefully, 25 years down the road in my career. But I can say that this year I did a national talk for ACCP in shorts and camo Crocs.
Yeah. Wait. So, okay. Well, we'll get to your outfit when we talk about your actual talk, but you're absolutely right. And meanwhile, we're sitting there. I'm wearing a sport coat. I think you may have had a tie on, right? Because the earlier you are, you think you have to. And I think one thing we need to try to do, and we definitely highlighted this last time, is we got to have pharmacists trying to be more casual. We need less shirts and ties and jackets.
And I find this really, I don't know, maybe a little bit backwards because, I mean, I agree with you 100% when we go to this meeting. I feel like it's sometimes a little bit too uptight. I feel way more comfortable engaging in a conversation with you when I don't have an unnecessary tie, choking my neck.
Yep.
But to hear you say that, you're also the person that always wants to wear a sports coat at an airport because, as you say, quote, you never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah, you dress for the job you want, not the job you have. That's an absolute fact. I will die on that hill. You're absolutely right. Well, the thing is, and for those listening, there are 2 tips here for meetings. 2 tips. I'll hand these out. These are prized possessions here. Number 1, a sport coat can require you to not wear a tie. Like you don't need a tie with a sport coat. So that can be one way to get out of wearing a tie. The other thing is if you want to class your shoes up, you just got to get new shoestrings for your dress shoes. Put a little color to them. Boy, do they pop. Especially you bring a couple. Like Anthony, how many pairs of shoestrings do I bring when I go to annual meetings?
You have your own little travel kit just for shoelaces, and it blew my mind.
Okay, by travel kit, he means the actual kit that they came in. But I think it was a set of like 8 of them. But it's like $10 to $15, and it feels like you're wearing new shoes. So I'm telling you, everyone put a pin in that. That's a pro tip there. Yeah, so I think that, the poster sessions are they're going to be a little bit of a work in progress, and they're not going to be as good as they are in person. But I feel like ACCP, some of the things they did were really nice, and they did everything they could to make it as interactive as possible, which I thought was good. And I thought that, all things considered, they pulled it off pretty well.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about the posters before we move on, because one thing I think you said is important is in order to engage the audience with posters, it's so nice to be able to zoom in and to, take a little bit more time as opposed to just a little quick 3-5 minute spiel people feel like they have to give, and you really want to engage with the information and marinate on it and figure out how you can use that information to either create your own research project or change your practice. For those of you that create posters, whether it's virtual or live printed, put a QR code on it because you can quickly YouTube, Google how to do that. And it's so easy. I can sit there and listen to you give your presentation and also take a quick picture of that QR code and save it somewhere. And I can come back to that poster later to remind me, to look a little bit further into it or maybe to take notes from it, etc.
So kind of combining the best of both worlds there.
Yep.
All right. I like that. Now let's kind of dig into some of these talks, some of these sessions here. And we'll kind of we'll kind of be all over the place. Now, Anthony and I, we didn't go to all of the same talks. So like I'll talk a little bit in the beginning. And then, when there are times that we both went to the talk, we'll obviously add some things. But then sometimes, one of us just went. So I think the first one, Anthony, did you listen at all to the discussion on the advancements in the treatment of emergent seizures?
Nope.
So this was the I love this name, the Central Nervous System PRN, which I think is great. I was expecting like a neurology PRN or something. And for those who may not know, if maybe not involved in ACCP, PRN means the Practice and Research Network. So it's like it's a big networking thing. If you're not involved and you're an ICU or EM pharmacist, both of those PRNs are really great. Definitely encourage you all to kind of join there. And the other disclaimer I forgot to say in the beginning is Anthony and I are not sponsored by ACCP. This podcast is not sponsored by ACCP. This is truly just our thoughts and trying to give you all a little bit of nuggets of knowledge. So just a little disclaimer, only 48 minutes into the episode. But the emergent seizures, so we had Hyojin Su from the Los Angeles VA that kind of talked about treatment pre-hospital. And ultimately, the biggest thing is that benzos are still the treatment. Early treatment is still what's recommended. And there are very few studies comparing benzos. So I think generally speaking, IV lorazepam or IM midazolam kind of feels to be like some of the preferred benzos there. And then the second speaker, Natalie Goffman, she's from the Global Neurosciences Institute, and she kind of talked about treatment in the hospital setting. And she had a great review on the causes of seizures, and she included patient cases, which I thought was nice. I thought that a lot of times in some of these talks, adding some patient cases kind of made it to where you could feel like it was conversational, even though it was virtual. And the biggest point, and I know, if you're looking for more information on seizures, Corinne Berger came on and talked about status epilepticus, and this was a huge take-home point. I feel like when you join neurology, this gets tattooed on you somewhere, but do not underdose benzos or your anti-epileptics, right? Intubate if necessary, but don't use lower doses to prevent respiratory depression, because most of the studies show that if you do the bigger doses, the seizure resolves, and then that prevents intubation itself. Now, a couple things that highlights that I did not know. Anthony, did you know? Oh, wait, before I tell you, what do you think is the most prescribed anti-epileptic drug worldwide?
Oh, I would probably Ativan's probably a softball because you can use it for so many things.
No, not a benzo, like an anti-epileptic drug.
Keppra.
So that's what I would have thought. Valproic acid. Do you know that?
Oh, wow, yeah.
I would not have guessed that. That would have been third in my lineup for sure. I don't know, maybe not even third. And then I'm definitely going to steal this. One of the big side effects, you mentioned Keppra, levetiracetam, agitation and mood disturbances can kind of be a big thing. She called them the Keppra crazies, and that is maybe my new name for that side effect. And then obviously at the end of her talk, she spent a decent amount of time kind of reviewing the background and the results of the ESA trial, the landmark trial from New England Journal of Medicine, kind of comparing some of those AEDs. And the take-home point ultimately is that use the AED that's available to be given the quickest. So if you have Keppra in your Pyxis, do that. If you have fosphenytoin in your Pyxis, or your Omnicell, that's what you're going to use. So I thought that was really great and kind of hammered home a few points that a lot of our neurology or critical care colleagues have kind of emphasized as well.
Yeah, I think another big important point just from that trial and things that I've learned just since then is dosing of Keppra in the emergent situation. I'd never in my lifetime would have thought 4.5 grams up front was the way to go, or 60 mg per kg max of 4.5 grams. So that has definitely raised some eyebrows at my institution when I started pulling that card.
Oh yeah, you're the first time you put that order in, the main pharmacy's calling you for sure. Like, did you make a mistake here? No, is this supposed to be 450? So why don't you? So what was you went? We both kind of listened to, but what was the next talk that you listened to?
I listened to the stress ulcer prophylaxis for the first session or the first piece and a half, and then I kind of piddled around through the slides for the third section. I will say, just in general, when I go to an ACCP meeting, most of what I really like the networking. In the CE sessions, there's probably maybe two, or definitely two, maybe three that are kind of critical care related. I feel like this time there were so many because the critical care and the GI liver nutrition PRN, they joined forces. The CNS PRN, like you just mentioned, was kind of critical care related. I feel like there were just so many different CEs that were related to critical care this year that was a noticeable difference from years past. So I thought that was really great. But stress ulcer prophylaxis, the one that I really paid attention to up front was the controversies in the ICU related to stress ulcer prophylaxis. It was Paul Reynolds from Colorado, and he included some unpublished data that his group's probably finalizing right now to come out. And when I say he addressed the controversy about should you use stress ulcer prophylaxis or is nutrition enough? He didn't talk as much about PPIs versus H2s, which maybe is expected because there's, not near as many comparative studies between the two. It's always just PPI versus placebo. But man, I was always on the train before listening to his talk of if they're getting fed, you don't need stress ulcer prophylaxis. And I think it's the new guidelines out of Denmark, the country of Denmark. They say their guidelines say if you're not in a randomized controlled trial, you don't give stress ulcer prophylaxis. Period. And so I listened to his talk, and the more he talked, the more I heard both sides, and the more I just debated myself inside my head. So I mean, I had my own conversation going on listening to his talk. So I thought he did a great job comparing the two. And there was more stuff later in the other two sessions also about enteral nutrition. But I think a good perspective to have, these are kind of my take homes. Enteral nutrition itself may not actually be protective like I thought it was. Potentially, enteral nutrition is just a surrogate for less critically ill. It's really common sense. Like now that I hear it, but I didn't think about it like that before.
Wow.
You have somebody come in on 3 pressors, intubated, whatever. You're not going to feed them just because of how much rocket fuel, that they're on with their catecholamines, et cetera. So, maybe the less severely ill that are getting fed, and he had a really nice, picture, that had very high, moderate, and low risk. And where do you draw the line for risk benefit ratio for when you should give prophylaxis? And I think one of the things he hit on was, yes, enteral nutrition seems like it might be protective. Stress ulcer prophylaxis may actually be bad in the folks that are the most critically ill. And he had some reasons for that. Obviously, those are the people that are definitely going to be getting the prophylaxis. But there's some pretty cool data about how acid suppressive therapy changes your microbiome, some T-cell depression. So different maybe side effects or impacts that stress ulcer prophylaxis may have that may not just be jumping out at you, which is very interesting. He did mention there was a really nice risk profile of bleeding risk, stress ulcer related bleeding associated with renal replacement therapy. And so that was suggested to be a new, quote, independent risk factor. He also talked a little bit about how, looking at the incidence of clinically significant, clinically important, overt GI bleeding, whatever terminology, definitions you want to use. There's been a lot of changes from the original Deborah Cook study back in '94. We do a lot of different things on the ventilator to change, low tidal volume ventilation, et cetera. And we also are a lot better at feeding people sooner. And so those things kind of inherently can dictate some of that. The only thing, and then the next section, the next little piece was about stress ulcer prophylaxis in the med-surg patients. And obviously kind of deprescribe, don't do it. The only thing that I think is kind of not talked about very much, and if there's some data out there to really convince you one way or the other, the listeners, please, let me know, is when you leave the ICU, but you're still on the ventilator, maybe you go to the floor or to an LTAC with a chronic trach.
Yeah, like your trach collar during the day and vent at night or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. You talk about the pathophys of the stress ulcers and the mucosal bleeding, et cetera. That positive pressure ventilation and the alteration to your splanchnic gut and gut flow, et cetera. It really makes me question, because I feel like that's a little bit less talked about, and it's more focused on enteral nutrition and intrinsic coagulopathies, et cetera. So if there's data out there, y'all please share.
Yeah, I guess I've never thought about it, because those patients are always getting enteral nutrition, and I was like, oh, they don't need stress ulcer prophylaxis. So I guess we'll have to tweak what we've been doing a little bit. Now the next kind of session that I went to was the emergency medicine PRN focus session, which was titled Shades of Gray Within the Guidelines, Debated Topics in Cardiac Arrest. I will say these had my second favorite title slides. Man, I'm always so impressed by pharmacists and really everybody at who presents at conferences, how creative their presentation names are. It always just absolutely makes my day. But the first speaker was her name's Jacqueline Stoffel. She is an emergency medicine specialist at Baylor down in Dallas, Texas, actually. And it was talking about alteplase in cardiac arrest. And I think all of us have had experience, or at least have heard about potentially using it in that scenario. And realistically, her takeaway was that unless PE is what you're really thinking or suspicious of, most of the evidence elsewhere is rough at best. And even the PE stuff is pretty difficult. I think a lot of us, and with COVID and the cath labs being closed, I think a lot of us had to use potentially thrombolytics in like ACS or cardiac arrest due to an MI. And so there's some controversy there. Basically, the emphasis is on high quality CPR and defibrillation. Now, if you are an ECMO center, but if you're not, or you don't have some of those advanced interventions, potentially talk at least to the provider about whether the patient would be a candidate for thrombolytics or not. And I thought it was really nice. She kind of went into, when would you suspect a PE, right? Dyspnea or syncope, female, maybe they're younger. Talked about what you might see on the point of care ultrasound, different things on the EKG, like a right bundle branch block, or T-wave inversion. They present in PEA or asystole, which I did not know that PEs commonly do, and that's what most of the research says. And then a really good job kind of comparing TPA and tenecteplase. Tenecteplase has, I think it's the TICO study that looked at its use in cardiac arrest. So it's a little user-friendly in terms of dosing and administration. The emergency medicine PRN was having some technical difficulties, but one thing that I wanted to highlight that I thought was really cool that this group did was they had some audience participation questions. So I think a lot of us have been in audiences where we're like texting polls and getting those real-time answers, and they were able to do that for some of these. And I thought that was really cool to kind of, even though we're virtual, to kind of get that in person, or that kind of make it feel like you're having that in-person interaction. The second speaker, and if you're on Twitter, the name would probably sound familiar, Gary Pexa from Rush University's emergency medicine specialist, quit fibbing, beta blockade for cardiac arrest due to VFib. So I love that. These titles, I'm such a sucker for them. I already told you. But he basically highlighted that, the patients that he really focused in on, those patients who have shockable rhythms, right? And if you think about the ACLS algorithm, they've received 3 rounds of epi, 3 rounds of shocks. We've got to the point where you're giving some sort of antiarrhythmic, probably amiodarone, maybe lidocaine, and they're still in VFib or VTAC. Kind of, what do we do? And he kind of went over, his group published a systematic review and meta-analysis in resuscitation earlier this year, and basically found that at that point, right, that patient who they've gotten 3 shocks, 3 rounds of epi, you've given that antiarrhythmic, they're still in VFib or VTAC. That might be when you kind of pull the trigger on giving some esmolol. Now, it's limited data, and if you look at kind of the meta-analysis, and he even acknowledged this, those confidence intervals are wide, baby. They are wide, like 1.05 to 18.56. So it's definitely hypothesis generating, but kind of going through the data is nice. I'll say whenever I've brought up esmolol in these situations before, and I'll just say most of the colleagues that I've worked with in the past were less than excited about it. But I think as we get more data, this might be something that potentially comes through. And the third speaker, and man, she's probably forgotten more about clinical pharmacy just from hearing her speak than I've ever known. But her name is Donna Schuler-Trucolo. I hope I pronounced that right. She's an emergency medicine pharmacist from University of Virginia, talking about epinephrine and cardiac arrest. I thought it was an awesome talk because she went through the history of epinephrine and really picked it apart. And I honestly had no idea. The ACLS guidelines were first published in like 1974. She also highlighted, so Anthony, she said, so we're in Donna's presentation, she said, everyone should know who John Jacob Abel is. Do you have any idea who that is?
I have no idea.
So he's supposed
when I hear John Jacob, the only John Jacob that comes to mind is that song from back as a kid, the John Jacob Jingleheimer Smith.
Na 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 na. Well, he's like one of the fathers of pharmacology, and basically he created the first pharmacology school and basically isolated adrenaline or epinephrine. Now, not in the form that we use it today, but like he was one of the first to do it. So I felt kind of called out a little bit that I had no clue who that person was, and the fact that she's like, well, everyone should know that. I was like, ooh, makes me feel better that you didn't know either. And then any presentation, so everyone knows this is a pro dog podcast, right? And any presentation that describes the development of kind of epinephrine as the dog development, sign me up. There were so many animal models, and it was just incredible. It was up my alley. We got dog photos. But why are we using dogs to test epinephrine? Like, what is this about? Why does all the early data with epinephrine kind of come through the animal side of things? I don't like that. Do you like that?
Definitely don't like that. I'm very much pro dog. I'm sure that there's a history of that somewhere with regard to laws and ethics and this, that, and the other. So there's probably a reason that it started. I think Dan Griffith back in our residency days, he would tell us the whole story about how they learned that TPNs, you could live on a TPN from, somebody was raising a pack of beagles. So I know that dogs are a common thing. Definitely not something you hear animal studies brought up as often in pharmacy CE presentations, but I do think she brought up a couple more. I think Brittany Bissell brought up some mouse models, et cetera, also.
Shout out to Dan, by the way. For any of the Emory colleagues listening or anyone involved in nutrition support, you would know who he is, but just the absolute best. And we're on the topic of dogs here. Has anybody made out in the pandemic more than all of everyone's collective just animals?
My dog has definitely benefited the absolute most from the pandemic. She does get a little bit annoyed that sometimes, I'd be at home and I'd lock myself in the office. And I'll leave the back door open for her to run in and out, but she's definitely appreciates that I'll get up, every 20, 30 minutes and walk outside and let her run around and, throw the ball or whatever. And not to digress from the meeting, but there has been a Twitter poll going around from a lot of residents saying, should I get a dog while I'm in residency?
And the answer is no.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like I am straight trolling when I comment on these resident posts asking if they should get a dog, because everyone in there on the feed so far is so positive. Oh my gosh, you should get a dog. They're the greatest, for mental health and to help you get through the year. I had a dog during residency. I got at the end of P4 year, I believe. And I lived in a tiny apartment, and granted, I did have a big dog. And also I was at the hospital all the time. And so I felt so bad. I had to give luckily my grandparents were gracious enough. They kept her for, I don't know, a year or so while I finished residency training. So I am a very big advocate for don't get a dog during residency. So yeah, just my 2 cents, but I'm glad to hear that you're on the same side of the fence as me.
Well, I guess I'm just thinking, like, when I was a resident, I lived by myself. So like if you have other people, you have roommates and things, that's a different story. Like, I think then that's a little more reasonable. Like, I'm just like, to the residents out there listening, right? I know you're not working 8-hour days. I know that's not true. You're not working 7, 8-hour days. So it's just not fair to a pup, or they're going to trash your apartment or house or whatnot. So that's the only reason why we're pro dog. Maybe just wait till you're working in a position that has more reasonable working hours.
Yep.
The other thing that I just want to highlight is, I think a lot of times, so the position I have now, I work more in the ED, and even in the ICU, sometimes you don't necessarily always have great IV access. And they did kind of a great review on, if you don't have IV access, every other route kind of sucks. Like, there's really no, like, the endotracheal route has crazily highly variable absorption. The IO route, you don't get as high of like Cmax or AUC in terms of like with your epi. And then intracardiac, I mean, we're not cracking chests on everybody that we're doing ACLS on, so that's a little tough. So I just thought that was interesting that I think a lot of times, people will come in with IOs, and until I heard this, I wouldn't necessarily think twice. Now I'll probably be pushing a little bit more to get some better IV access.
Yeah, from the ACLS talk, or the whole PRN talk, I think from the fibrinolytic talk, I think one thing that I took away from it was the best studies that are out there are kind of logistically and practically just not very feasible. Mm-hmm. I think she mentioned, that the studies, it was like within 6 minutes of a rest, or I don't know, whatever it was, they had point of care ultrasound, in there immediately. And I think unless you are very well trained and equipped and have some dedicated personnel to do that, you're not going to be able to follow some of the methodology that some of those good studies had to kind of show that it's beneficial. So I think just logistically, that's something that's really hard to create with studies.
And I think the study you're talking about was the one from TPA talking about kind of I think it's the PPET study where TPA showed this crazy benefit, but the average time to administration of TPA in the code was 6 minutes. For any of us who are giving TPA in a code, I'm telling you what, it is not at the 6 minute mark, right? It is closer to the 16-minute mark than the 6 minute mark. So that's just the incredible thing is like, you're going to the code with TPA, which I guess is just a power move by the pharmacists there, but it's just not something I think routinely that I do. So kind of, thinking about how that literature applies to you and how you function in a ACLS setting, I think is important. Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, and all things related to ACLS, and I think Gary talked about this in his, is a huge confounder for all of these studies, for whatever the intervention may be, is we don't do a good job taking into account therapeutic hypothermia or targeted temperature management. It's a standard of care. Mm-hmm. It is a huge impact on your survival, your neurological outcomes. And so for whether it's the ED or the critical care PRN, I think we don't get enough education about hypothermia. So I would love for that to be up and coming soon, at a meeting or maybe on the pod or, whatever it may be. But I think that's very important. And also shout out to Gary, man, as a speaker, I had a hard enough time getting permission, like copyrights to use pictures and images. And he had a couple hard flexes in there where he was like, oh, this data is not in the manuscript, but it came, I reached out to all of the first authors from the studies I included here. So not data that you know about, but I got it from them myself.
Oh, and he said it so slyly too. Oh yeah, it was perfect. You're right. He was looking so professional, rocking the suit and tie, has the thing in the background, but when he did that, he was definitely flexing. We just couldn't see it in the video picture of it.
Yeah.
And then the IDPRN I thought had a really good talk that literally, you talk about focusing on ICU. It's literally antimicrobial stewardship in the ICU.
Yep, lots of ICU stewardship. This again, ACCP, lots of programming this year related to critical care, and the ID one was slam dunk all about ICU stewardship.
Yeah, it was, we started off with, Dr. Chess, and he is a pharmacist who works at the St. Christopher Hospital for Children. He talks about beta-lactam TDM, kind of therapeutic drug monitoring. And, I'll just say this, and I mean this in the best way possible, is I could tell he worked in Philly. And I have a couple friends who went to Villanova or from Philly, and I don't know why, he just had a Philly vibe from his talk. Like I could just casually see him grabbing a cheesesteak and going to watch a Flyers or an Eagles game or something. But what would you say was your kind of big takeaway from his talk?
Oh, I don't remember the specific ones. I think it might have been his if he was first.
Yeah, he was.
They talk about CSF concentrations and a lot of the different PKPD, and it just back in the day you don't really hear about these near as much anymore. I know Bill Asbury from Emory, he did a PK pharmacokinetics PGY2, and I think listening to some of the talks within the ID PRN programming, it really reinforced that we need some of those folks back. I know there's some ID fellowships that do a lot of that stuff. And I feel like a lot of those are a lot more research, benchtop kind of based. earlier tier translational research, and we need some later tier clinical like correlation maybe. I don't want to step on toes and offend anybody if people do that, but I just feel like the pharmacokinetic style PGY2s are kind of, you don't hear about those anymore.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they just really reinforce that all of that stuff is really important, and stuff that I just wouldn't have necessarily thought about or know.
And I feel like one of the takeaways that I had is there's so much data, but there's so little clinical application. Like, for example, it took from the moment he started speaking in his talk, it took him 28 minutes to get to kind of like the practical aspect of actually doing this at your facility. And ultimately, isn't that one of like the most important parts, is like, how are we able to take what is from research and apply it to patients and help with that? So I feel like that's, when I say disconnect, not a disconnect from his talk, I'm saying just a disconnect from kind of the research, Monte Carlo simulation thing, that kind of research versus what we do kind of at the bedside. But the other big takeaway that I had was that the massive key is communication with your lab personnel to ensure that these levels are useful and not a waste of money, which, yes, I feel like when you're doing specialized levels like these, making sure that they're actually useful and you can act on them is obviously super important.
Yeah, between levels and folks in the micro lab, I think that those relationships are just crucial. And if you guys out there are preceptors, if you have an opportunity to have your trainees, students, or residents spend a day or two in micro, whether on an ID or a critical care, emergency medicine rotation, super, super important for those trainees to just see what all goes into it and how doing unnecessary cultures and lab tests can really take away from other folks that need it, et cetera.
Yeah, his kind of takeaway was, or his take-home message was, investigate, start small, and build from there. And I was like, wow, that's a mic drop there, because that's the exact way when you have something like this, if you're wanting to implement beta-lactam or antibiotic TDM outside of the classic vancomycin and aminoglycosides, I feel like if you try to do everything, it might set you up to fail, at least in the beginning, while you're getting a good process in place. So the next speaker, her name was Laura Swengross from Richmond, Virginia, and she was talking about de-escalation initiatives using microbiology nudging. So what was, like, how do you feel like when you talk about antibiotics and things, Anthony, do you feel like I thought nudging was a really great verb. Do you feel like that's what you do sometimes?
Yeah, nudging is like a cute way of saying being passive aggressive almost. I think she talked about what, like the eye level posters and just putting some of your own institution's data. Like, it's like this right here would be perfect. If you did a poster at a meeting and you showed deprescribing or whatever it was, antibiotic stop dates, whatever it is that improves things, use that, put that poster in your ICU, put that poster in the emergency room, and let people see it.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree, because I feel like we do a lot of these research posters and projects, and you might present it at a meeting, like a committee meeting in your hospital, right, based on what you ran, but a lot of times they might not get publicized outside of the pharmacy, and you may be missing kind of key people that could learn from that. I like that I appreciate that she recognized that there's some limitations to nudging. I don't think all stewardship talks acknowledge some of the possible issues that can come from this, and how, especially when you're trying to work on building relationships, things that, different strategies can be potentially harmful to those relationships depending on how you go about them. So I really appreciate that she kind of talked about maybe limitations and things to consider.
Yeah, and I think was it the third speaker was Tony Gerlach, who Monica Mahoney, the moderator for this session, she made the joke, or the way she moderated the session was kind of like a video game.
Yeah.
Player 3, the controller's over to you, and she introduced him and got him laughing because she called him the big boss. And first, he didn't deny it. He went a step further and said, "Well, it's not the big boss, but they call me the big Kahuna." So for all of you out there, if you know who Tony is, and if you see him at a future meeting, call him the Big Kahuna.
Oh, I can't wait to call him it. Well, and the thing is, and I did an interview. I interviewed at Ohio State and for a residency, and my first year residency research was on dexmedetomidine. And little did I know, I'm presenting my research to basically, one of the people who published all the early papers on dexmedetomidine. So Tony is incredibly brilliant, and he is the Big Kahuna and the final boss and all of those things. But the fact that you're right, we're talking about people flexing in virtual formats. What a flex. I love it.
Yeah, the one thing I appreciate about Tony the most is that even though he's well established in critical care, especially he uses his Twitter platform very well to give shout outs to his personal mentors and how they grew him as a clinician and as a researcher, et cetera. So I think it's always nice when well established folks continue to emphasize the importance of mentorship and, paying it forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think, an emphasis, not only from his talk, but I feel like from all the three talks, is collaboration is key. And I feel like it should just be a key principle in medicine in general. But for a successful antimicrobial stewardship, right, the physicians need to work well with the pharmacists and with the team, and the ICU pharmacists should really work well with the stewardship pharmacists to work in tandem and feel like it's a moving part all in the same direction, rather than feeling like one person's pulling one way, one's going another, and things like that.
Yeah, the only thing that I was a little bit surprised that didn't come up necessarily in this whole three speaker panel was delabeling penicillin allergies in the ICU. There was a nice little Vanderbilt study where they gave, I think, one dose of oral penicillin or amoxicillin, and if they didn't react, then they removed it. I'm very, very much summarizing here, but definitely some good data to be able to do that hopefully will be very practical that people can take home. But just kind of interesting that it didn't come up.
Well, and then, right, we had the critical care peer in focus session featuring the guest, the conference correspondent, Anthony Hawkins. So this was seeking clarity in septic shock controversies. So before we get into it for a second, let's just how was it preparing for a talk with this virtual format? Was it, what were some challenges? Was it easier than you expected? Or, what was, take us through your mind as you're preparing for this versus maybe an in-person discussion.
Man, I could talk for a while here. I think things that challenges, I think preparing or recording the talk, several weeks before the actual session, I felt like I had to prepare for my talk 2 different times.
Wait. Quick pause too. What did you have to make sure you did in that scenario? Because you recorded that 2 weeks or so prior, but then you had a live Q&A. And what was a requirement from ACCP?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There was not only did I have the stress, the anxiety of giving a talk in this platform, which, just up front, thanks so much to the critical care peer and to ACCP letting me talk on a national stage. This was so far, the peak, I would say, of my academic critical care career. So extremely exciting and humbling for me to be able to do that. But not only in the angst and the anxiety of preparing the talk, I also had 2 different sessions just to meet with the company that was providing the platform to speak. And man, they gave us instructions, make sure that you wear the same shirt. You have the same background. I had a whole, almost a 1-hour session about the lighting, and the camera on my computer needed to be eye level. I'm like, well, I don't have at home one of those desks that, that goes up and down, ergonomical. So I scrambled around the house and I grabbed 5 different, between textbooks and random other books, to jack my computer up to eye level. So that was very important. They said, if you have a swivel chair, you should probably get rid of it and go get a chair from your kitchen table so you're not inclined to, swivel and twirl around. You need to stay a certain distance from the camera so that there's not more than 2 inches of empty space between your head and the top of your camera view. They went so far as to say about the lighting and what type of wattage and what size light bulb and the placement of the bulb. I mean, when I say these people were professional and they knew their stuff, man, I mean, it was like so type A. They weren't even pharmacists, but I just felt that they had pharmacy in their blood.
Do you even know what watts light bulbs you have? I have zero clue.
Buying light bulbs is one of the most stressful and annoying things as an adult. You got to get the different type of bulb, the different size connector, the different type of wattage, and then the different light. Is it white light? Is it soft light? Is it daylight? Is it dim light? I mean, yellow light, all the different things. And then when you buy them, then you got to go back and return them if it's not the same. And if you buy a house that you have one go out, you can't just screw out another light bulb and go to Home Depot and try to match them up. So buying light bulbs is terrible, but I don't want to get on that soapbox.
Now, no, go ahead.
Preparing the talk, obviously by itself has a little bit of anxiety. Again, I felt like I had to prepare for it twice. One thing that I really wish is when I recorded it, I could have listened to my own recorded talk before the live Q&A, because you're in the moment, you forget what you say specifically. Because some of the live Q&A could have come from specific comments that I made in there. And they told us, they encouraged us to listen to our live talk and to be available for, and I don't know if they told you guys this as registrants, but while my talk is being presented live, even though it's not obviously live, if you had a question, you could have chatted me in the chat box in real time while I was presenting, and I could have answered it. But I also had to go to this other Q&A room to prepare for the live thing. So I would have liked to have been able to hear my own talk, right before we actually had it, so that I could hear myself and know what I talked about and statements that I made, or whatever it may have been, in preparation for the Q&A session. I will say that I think not being in giving the talk virtually and recorded as opposed to live and in person, as an extrovert, I draw all of my energy from people and from the crowd. And when I'm giving a live presentation, that energy and that excitement tends to make me not be a good steward of my time and my clock management. But because I didn't have that energy to go from, I had my slides. I don't want to say a script, but I had things that I knew that I wanted to say, and I didn't really deviate from that very much because I didn't have the energy to draw from. And so I think my clock management was actually a lot better than it would have been in live session.
Oh yeah. You had 25 minutes. And what was your time?
24:57.
I mean, that is, anyone who's been involved in a conference just stood up and gave you a round of applause there. Like no one held up the 5 minute. Then like down at Cirque, they have the 1 minute sign where everyone's eyeing you down as you're presenting your research. So you didn't have any of that.
Yeah, it was definitely great clock management by all three of the critical care speakers, and our entire session just being moderated by Alex. I think he did a great job as a moderator as well, related to time management.
Oh yeah, Alex, friend of the pod. He was a great moderator. I will say, Alex, if you're listening, your Zoom background needs a little bit of an upgrade there. If we're judging Zoom backgrounds. But you led. You were the lead off batter here, and your titles. I mentioned I love titles, and you're like a king at it. Swell to get well, or just press on. Finding balance of fluids and vasoactives. Now, I will say, because this was different than the other sessions I listened to, when you listen to this session, the face of Anthony talking is right there, and I was not expecting it when that came live. So that was, I wouldn't say startling, but just very unexpected. When you're just expecting to see the slides, and then you have like a live kind of video coming in, kind of like a picture-in-picture there, which I really liked. And then you're so good at having more than just words on slides, a lot of pictures and good charts and graphs and things. So that's always good. And you even shouted out the 2 truths and a lie, which is one of my favorite games to play.
Yeah, it was really interesting trying to figure out how to do audience engagement, but also knowing I had so many things I wanted to talk about and say with such little time. So it was a challenge to figure out how how to incorporate some of that stuff and give you guys time to think versus polling the audience in live time and that type of thing. I will say I'm glad you like the little picture of my face, because while I recorded, I was not only looking at my slides to present, I was also looking at myself the whole time. So definitely made it a little bit more awkward.
Yeah, that had to be terrible for you to like watch yourself. I know that would be terrible for me.
Yeah, and then to advance your slides, like you had something on your phone. So I actually had a clicker on my cell phone that I had to call into. And so if you go back or if you remember from when I was talking, you see my eyes continue to look down, and it's because I'm trying to look at my phone and figure out how to advance my slides with the buttons as opposed to just hitting an arrow or the space bar, something on the keyboard. So definitely an interesting take.
And then I don't know if this was planned or not, but the second speaker, April Miller Quidley, who practices she's a critical care pharmacist in North Carolina. She was a perfect presenter to follow you, because you just have one Southern voice followed by another awesome Southern voice. It was like just such a perfect transition. And she was talking about, again, great title, More Than Fresh Squeezed Orange Juice, Therapies for Metabolic Resuscitations. And I really like that. A lot of times you're listening to these talks and people are just reading you basically abstracts of research that, if you're interested in this, you've probably heard of at one point or another, but she really kind of talked about them practically. And you obviously did that too, talking about the Rose model and deresuscitation and different strategies, hidden fluids and things like that. And so I really like, when you're able to go more in depth and kind of give some practical things, rather than just kind of reviewing things that everyone could kind of look at from PubMed or things. And then the other thing that I loved and that I noticed as April is speaking is that all three of the speakers, you all worked together, and you had one patient case. It was like one patient that started with your talk and then ended with our third speaker. And I thought that was such creativity and such an awesome job, like to have continuity through that.
Yeah, and having two great speakers and clinicians like April and Gretchen. Being the first speaker, I had to create the patient, and I had to make sure that they had something that they could work with. So I'm a procrastinator to begin with, and so I think Gretchen already had all of her slides done. She had already shared them with us, and then we found out we needed to do a patient case, and that it would be nice to be consistent throughout. And so she's already done with her slides and everything. I'm still trying to put my stuff together and figure out, what my objectives are, basically. Hadn't even started yet. And so, man, did the pressure come on then. And then I had to create the patient case before I even created all my slides so that everybody else could work from it.
Yeah, and the third speaker was Gretchen Sasha. I'm Gretchen, I'm probably pronouncing your last name wrong, and I'm very sorry about that. But again, third incredible title, just grand slam. Not just anybody can handle pressure. Therapies to stop shock. And I felt like you were all such great presenters. I felt like you all were talking to me, which is I think it's a very unique quality in speakers to have that ability to capture an audience, even if it's virtual or things. So I mean, you were lucky to have such incredible counterparts, because it really, the talk was awesome. And if you're registered, for the ACCP meeting, hopefully you're listening or have participated in some of these, but this is an absolute must listen to for sure.
Yeah. And one thing, Nick, that you mentioned is, having slides, or when you present, you talk off the slides and you have pictures to kind of relate and maybe teach. I love analogies and being able to teach from those. So, I use my broken sink and the leaky pipe model, the example. But one thing, if you're a leader in ACCP or any conference or organization, et cetera, to have good slides, there is a difference in a good slide set as a speaker or as the presenter and a good slide set for the audience. Mm-hmm. And I'm really big on having two separate slide sets, because I like to have pictures and I like to have animations. But if you're an attendee and you want to download my slides, the slides that I use to present are useless to you. Because I don't have as many words. And when you are a speaker at any meeting, and for several different organizations, large and small, I have to specifically ask, can I submit 2 different versions of slides? And that's not something that's advertised. It's not something that they tell you up front. And Paul Reynolds is a perfect example of this. And, not taken away from his talk at all. His talk was exceptional. I've already talked about the controversies in stress ulcer prophylaxis. He had a lot of great information. He had a lot of great slides and pictures. If you go download his slide set to look back on, you can't see all of the information he presented because he has layered picture on top of picture where he animated things. And so I think it'd be good for speaker portals to have 2 different versions of slides you could upload for that exact reason. Yeah, so I reached out and asked ACCP. So if you guys look at my slides and try to follow along with my handout, they are slightly different because you don't care as much about the cute pictures or the funny memes that I try to create. You care more about the data that drives those pictures and the stories behind the pictures. And so I got rid of some of the pictures and just included some text, in the handout. But I think that's a good take home for anybody that's got some pull in organizations like that.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're interested in fluid stewardship or deresuscitation, this was kind of the meeting for you, because not only did you get to talk as well, but I was the moderator of the clinical reasoning series that was, Just Say No, pharmacotherapy stewardship within the hospital. And we had Brittany Bissell kind of talking about fluid stewardship. And I mean, how great was her talk?
It's really great because when we talk about fluid stewardship, my little 25-minute piece was really to give less fluids up front and to consider earlier pressors. And she talked about fluid stewardship a little bit more on the back end. She kind of echoed a lot, we had a lot of the same echoing message, is that fluids are harmful and that diuresis is good. And the earlier the diuresis and the more aggressive diuresis, probably the better. And so I think just to, kind of quickly summarize her awesome talk on fluid stewardship. Fluids are bad. Fluids are dangerous. Give them in conservative moderation. Only give them when there's a specific indication for the fluid, not because it's just a knee-jerk reaction. And pharmacists need to be so much more involved in both the recommendation to initiate and to adjust the dose and the timing of diuresis, which I thought was really great. And something that I hear about in practice all the time, I try to be aggressive with my diuresis and Lasix dosing. And they have an AKI and Lasix causes AKI. And people are blown away when I'm like, okay, well, sit down, let's have a talk. Fluids cause AKI. They cause organ edema. They cause renal edema and renal vascular congestion, et cetera, decreased filtration. Lasix, you may give a dose of diuresis and their creatinine goes up. That's not because the Lasix is causing an AKI. That's because the Lasix is removing all of the dilutional fluid and you're seeing what their creatinine actually is if they were at a normal fluid status. You look at some of the heart failure, the big studies, the CAREST-HF and the Ultra Disco, continuous ultrafiltration made creatinine go up. Why? Because you're removing fluid and not creatinine. And so you just naturally see that dilutional component decrease and people think that it's an AKI, and all Lasix is doing is revealing what was already there. So big shout out to her. Diurese early, more aggressively. Pharmacists need to be more involved, and don't be scared to diurese while you're on vasopressors because just because you're hypotensive doesn't mean you need fluid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I will say as the moderator, I had to try to, I was, one of my tasks was reviewing the slides. And I'll tell you what, it is intimidating being tasked with reviewing slides that Brittany Bissell or Simon Lamb created. They are, they're so well known. They're experts in their field, and I'm supposed to come here and give them critiques. There are a few things that make me feel as awkward as trying to peer review somebody that is clearly more knowledgeable in their field that they're speaking about. So that's just something that'll never feel not awkward to me. And I don't know. I don't think I know why. Maybe it's just because we know that they are much more educated and knowledgeable in those specific areas.
Nick, I think what you just described, without maybe even knowing it, is what we call imposter syndrome, and where we just don't feel as qualified. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. It's published about. It's even in JAMA, and a lot of people feel it. And so I don't think you're unique to that feeling, but you're qualified. I will say, when I knew you were moderating in that, and I hit play, I was really expecting you to open up with wherever you are and however you may be listening, thank you. And I'm your host, Nick Peters. I was really expecting it, and you put on your suit and you were definitely a little bit more professional with it. So it was great, but not going to say that I wasn't hoping for it.
Yeah, for some reason I plugged the podcast and I guess they edited it out. I don't know what that's all about. No, I didn't. Yeah, it's you have to know when to do it, and it was an honor that they asked me to do it. It was I think something that was extremely beneficial. We have Brittany talking about fluid stewardship, Simon Lamb talking about duration of antibiotics therapy, Mojda Hevner, who was the first guest we've ever had here, kind of talking about delirium stewardship and optimizing sleep, and then finally, we had Nicole Acquisto that really gave insight into non-opioid pain management and kind of opioid stewardship. So I think that it's dual certified for like BCPS and critical care, like BCCCP recertification. So if you're looking for those things, you can get 6 hours right here, and they are fantastic, and you're going to learn a whole lot. And then, it's always nice too, Mojda's been on the pod and you're here. And so it's always nice when you're at these national conferences and you're able to see friends of the pod peeking out in the program.
Yeah. And one thing that, Simon talked about was duration of antibiotics, and just want to share a little pro tip with listeners, especially trainees that have worked with me will know this. When they present patients any antibiotic that they're on, or even, like steroids these days, with Decadron, I always tell them that they need to present their antibiotics as what day they're on out of however many days that they need to be on. So if they're on Zosyn, they're on Zosyn day 3 of 7. And if you can't in your presentation give me the denominator that's already built into the EMR, that's a guaranteed an intervention right there. I'm such a big fan of putting in stop dates. I can always decide to stop it sooner if I want to, or de-escalate, or we decide it's non-infectious and whatever it may be, but always include stop dates.
So realistically, if thinking about the conference as a whole, I'll say I probably took away more from it than I was expecting. I probably enjoyed is probably not the right word. I think it was probably more practical than I was expecting. But the things that that were missing, and that in person, that networking, it was a glaring absence. And I'm not sure how any virtual conference is going to be able to overcome it.
Yeah. But I think, like we said at the beginning, I think hats off to ACCP, leadership for first making a decision on that, and making it virtual early on. It made just planning and so much of the logistics so much better. And then something else not related to the meeting itself, but just to the leadership for ACCP and taking a stand. There's this, I'm not blanking on the word right now, but the sexual harassment in pharmacy, was a big thing, and still is a big thing. And I think they've brought it to the forefront. They've made some incredible, big power moves to really show the importance and how serious they take it. And so, to Becky Smith and to Brittany Bissell and to the Barlow twins, Ashley and Brooke, and there's just podcasts and just lots of publicity that it's getting to bring it to the forefront. Sexual harassment in pharmacy. I think just again, super kudos to ACCP for being such a strong leader right now when times are so tough.
Yeah, and I think we're two men talking here, and I think that a lot of the things that were illuminated, I think a lot of women were probably not, maybe they were appalled at who it was or how it happened, but I doubt they were all that surprised. I think a lot of it is us as men just not understanding how day to day, how much our female colleagues, really regardless of what career they're in, and how much harassment and things they have to deal with just for being a woman in today's world. And so kudos, absolutely. Not only does it take courage from the women speaking out and from that perspective, but also ACCP and acknowledging that and really trying to advocate for change, for the profession, for females and really everybody. Well, I told our my Twitter followers that I'm trying to keep my episodes around an hour, and I have a big fat F for my grade for doing that today. I can't help it. Talking about conferences get me excited. When we're going back to clinical episodes, I promise they'll be closer to an hour, so learners and trainees can kind of do it. You can assign it to them or whatnot. I've heard some feedback that people are doing that. I think it's great. So this one, when Anthony and I are on, I'll just tell you, all bets are off. We like to talk, and especially we want to try to recap and highlight all the great talks and all the things that some of the pharmacists have been doing here at ACCP. So Anthony, what do you think your final thoughts are?
I do want to make sure that listeners and everybody knows that ACCP is doing their virtual residency showcase. I think it's this Friday. At least our program is this upcoming Friday. So if you guys are involved, make sure you go and support them. I think that was, again, talking about leadership and just setting the stage moving forward. I think they made this decision, and I think other large organizations kind of followed in that footstep. It's free. I believe it's free. Don't quote me on that. For trainees, students, and residents. I think this year for searching for residency programs is going to be so much different. But man, hopefully it's going to save them a lot of money. So
let's hope.
Check that out if you can. If you're a nurse practitioner, if you're an author and you're trying to get a paper published, if you have the opportunity and the funds to publish it as an open access paper, man, not only does it make your research get seen by way more people, but it also increases the odds of some of your work being included in presentations, because getting copyright permissions was, good gracious, the bane of my existence for some of this stuff. And it really limited me, honestly, in what type of, figures and stuff that I could create, because I'm not really tech savvy. Couldn't create some of the cool images, and I would have loved to have, used them from some of the authors and used all of their hard work they created. But definitely a pro tip, if you've got the means to do it, open access is really, really a great thing to do. Get involved with your organizations and come check out some of the recorded live on demand pre-recorded stuff that ACCP's programming had to offer this year. I think it was really, really good for the critical care community.
Yeah, absolutely. The critical care EM world lucked out with some of the programming and things that we got to take advantage of. So very well said. I completely agree on all fronts. The other thing I have to say is, we're recording this on Tuesday, November 3rd. Hope everybody's voting. This episode's going to get released either tomorrow or the next day. And I'll just say it. If you didn't vote, you can't complain about what's happening. You got to get out there and vote. Hopefully we got some things to celebrate. But if not, we're positive people. We will definitely move on. And honestly, November, it's fall. Man, it's chilly season. Leaves are turning. It is getting a little cold, though, I will say. When did this happen, Anthony? How cold is it down there?
Today, probably in the high 40s, low 50s. But like I said, deer moving. I'm excited, and football's on TV. Based on all the COVID, delays from football games, you can almost watch football every day of the week now. So that's also nice.
I like that. It's the little things. All right, Anthony, my friend, thanks for joining. Always great talking with you and recapping things. And don't worry, listeners, Anthony will be back, our conference correspondent, as we tackle future conferences, because I'm sure this isn't going to be our only virtual conference or meeting as we're coming up in the upcoming months or even year or so.
Yeah, man. Absolutely looking forward to a beer and bowling next time.
Thanks again to Anthony. He's the absolute best, the conference correspondent. Give him a follow on Twitter at I am a Hawkins. And then obviously, if you want to get in touch with me, Twitter, PharmacyToDose, that's TO2Dose, or via email, PharmacyToDose@gmail.com. On our website, you'll definitely find show notes and things. We'll try to include links to some of the studies and things we talked about here. But it's really good to be back. Missed you guys. We got some really good programming and things coming. So looking forward to releasing more and getting some of that good education out there. So until next time, I'm Nick Peters, and this is Pharmacy to Dose, the Critical Care Podcast.